Kara.
Thank you.
This was her old stomping ground. She did a journalism degree here, and then from here, she went on to go to such amazing places, from the Washington Post to the Wall Street Journal to New York Times to so many different types of events. But today, what she does is she does the popular podcast Sway, which I'm a regular listener. She also has the podcast Pivot with Scott Galloway, and she's a regular contributor to the New York Times. So today, I have the privilege to ask Kara some really cool questions. And I'll ask her some questions until about 6:15. And then at that point, we're going to open it up to you guys. Little Birdie told me that Kara loves questions.
And also, whoever asks the best questions, by my determination, that's all that counts. I have a sway hat here, which you can buy anywhere. There's a little times thing on the back, a little sway, so the best question wins that hat. So.
Okay, cool.
If you want it, honestly. It's cool. No one can have it. Like, it's not so. It's cool.
So, Kara, you write and talk every day.
Yes, too much.
Yeah.
That's how my voice sounds.
Constantly. So, what's on your mind today? 3 things that are on your mind today.
Well, today I did a pivot. I'll just give you an idea. We flew from San Francisco, my family. I have a lot of children. I have 4 kids, and we flew 2 of them back when we left. Well, I won't go into where I put the other one, but we flew back from San Francisco last night. We got in and then completely overslept because we were on West Coast time, and woke up like, oh shit, we're fucked. I did a pivot this morning with Scott Galloway. We looked over the predictions that we did over the past quarter. One of the things we try to do on pivot is hold ourselves to account. A lot of journalists don't do that. When we screw up, we say so. And then we discussed that and discussed Facebook's latest mess, for example, as one of the topics. So I was thinking and reading a lot about that today. Some of the really good reporting in the Washington Post about that. And some others had some, like Casey Newton and Platform had some great takes. And then I moved on to tracking I did an interview with Michael Lewis, who wrote Premonition. Of course, he's so famous as a writer. But we spent a good chunk of the interview talking about the death of his daughter. She was killed in a car accident last year, and she's the same age as one of my oldest son. And we had a really interesting discussion about that issue and how his family is doing. And then we went on to talk about it actually, oddly enough, dovetailed really interestingly into the discussion about COVID and the response by the United States. So I was thinking a lot about that, but I'm usually forward-looking in the interviews I have to do. So on next week, I have an interview with some big economists. I'm not supposed to say who they are. I can't say I'm interviewing Michelle Yao, who is an amazing actor, also actor, and she has a new movie that is about time travel and technology that I'm really interested in. So we're going to talk about that. So I'm always sort of focused on that next thing that I'm doing. And we're trying to figure out how we would interview President Zelensky, who we're trying to get a big interview with. So I'm always thinking about different topics all the time. And then, of course, I'm thinking about lunch for my 2-year-old, which went very well, I have to say.
I love it. In fact, you had a podcast that aired today, right, that had the interviews with 2 journalists from Russia and from Ukraine.
Yes.
So
we wanted to get someone on either side of the border. So the guy who had a TV reign, they played Swan Lake and then said no war and then ran out of the country. I interviewed him. He was amazing, and he is Tikhon Zetko, maybe. And then the other one, her name's Olga, and I could her last name, so I won't say it. It's not right in front of me. She is still in Ukraine, and what was amazing about those interviews, both of them, and so he can't go back to Russia, for example, because this law is due 15 years if you call it a war or an invasion versus a special military operation. And so he's left, and it was a great interview. He talked about what happened and everything else and the laws there, and then I was like, when are you going back? And he goes, he can't go back. Of course, he's like, my car's there, and I like my car. Like he can't go back to it. He left like as if he was eating dinner and walked out. That's what he had to do essentially. And the same thing with the Ukrainian journalist who is now moved west with her. Everyone's with their families, which is amazing. She has not left the country, and she's still continuing to report on what's happening. And she's from Kyiv, and she had to move west to her family's is in
before we get into asking you questions about technology and policy, et cetera, I want to first ask you a question about how you do your job.
Uh-huh.
I think that's a real source of curiosity, I imagine, for a lot of us. So
Yeah.
you know tons of people, you keep track of lots of different bits of information across lots of different industries, you know tech, you know politics, you know a bit about Hollywood. How do you organize all this? This just seems like a choice overload, information overload.
Yeah, I do. Well,
problem.
someone said that I make too much content. I do make a lot of content, and that's okay. I'm old. That helps, and so it's. I know I've spent a lot of time, and I was very early to covering this version of tech, which at the internet age, not the beginning of tech, obviously, but because everything's tech, a sphere is tech. If you really think about it, and everything's tech. And so I was very early, and so I got to know the people rather well at the beginning. Like I knew Elon, I was telling the driver over here, she had a very nice Tesla, and she's asked me where I was going. I said I was talking about tech. Do you know Elon? I go, yeah, very well actually. And we ended up talking about him quite a lot. And you know, she wanted to know if he's crazy. Yes, check. But he makes a nice car, and we talked about all kinds of stuff, which was interesting. So I met him when he was poor. Like I met Jeff Bezos when he had 6 people. I met all these people at a very young age. And also at the same time, I'm spending a lot of time now meeting the current people who are coming up in Web3, like Sam Bankman-Fried and a bunch of others. Oddly enough, I knew the Winklevoss brothers from when they screwed up there, and now they're over in crypto, which is interesting. So, I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time on my phone. I mean, this is literally the best relationship I've ever had. And I've had some great relationship. I should say that my wife is wonderful. But it's true. This is the best relationship I've ever had. I spent a lot of time on this, like reading and understanding what's going on, communicating, texting with people. I text when something happens, whatever happens, whether it happened to Disney a couple of weeks ago with the Jones A.K. bill, I text the right people and I start asking them what do they think and stuff like that. So I spend all day.
But how do you organize all this information?
In my head. What do you mean?
So you don't have like some special system
No,
of organizing
no.
it? You wake up in the morning and say, okay, these are the most important bits I need to keep track of?
Well,
How do you organize all these contacts?
I went to Columbia Journalism School, but before that I went to the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University. And one of the things I wanted to do, I had a portion of my family that's very active in the military, and I wanted to go in the military when I was younger. And I wanted to do military intelligence. I wanted to do scenario building, which is figuring out what might happen. And so I have a mind that thinks like that, like if this, then this, if this, then this, and stuff. And so I apply it to everything. And so when something happens, say to this week, it's this Facebook mess, this Dirty Tricks campaign. What a surprise from Facebook. It's always nice when people are consistent, I guess. They didn't even have to tell me. I was like, it's Facebook, because it is Facebook once again. They managed this campaign. We'll talk about it later, but it's racist. It's underhanded. It's everything wrong with this company. Like it creates distrust. It makes people have to run down ridiculous rabbit holes to fix things that didn't exist because they made it up. So I spent a lot of time just, when something happened, I'd read all the news in the morning, on Twitter typically, and then I try to figure out what I want to focus in on. And what helps is that I have two different podcasts. One, Pivot, is very topical, and so we collect the topical information, and Scott and I sort of chew over it twice a week, and so it keeps me very current, and he gives me a lot of insights. We have a lot of friends at Pivot, and so I get new insights almost constantly. And then I sort of, it sways the higher level one where I think of inflation, Ukraine, how can we do this when everyone else is sort of getting at it? And whatever technology thing, I tend to lean into technology. And then people I just find interesting. When Bob Iger left Disney, I called him again and again and said, you need to do your first interview with me because you're going to say terrible things out loud, finally. And so, and he laughed and ha ha ha. But I spent a lot of time bothering people about stuff. I think I've written Dolly Parton 400 times, like now, saying you need to come on and talk about, I don't want to do the adorable.
She'd be a good one on authenticity.
She would be. No, I don't want to talk to her about that. See, everyone talks about, they want to do the adorable Dolly, and I don't want to talk about her cakes, I don't want to talk about her boobs, I don't want to talk about her hair, I want to talk about her business acumen, because this woman is a viper when it comes to business. She has had the most fascinating career around, I want to talk about her business. I want that dolly. I want that one to show up because she's done very fast forward stuff around IP compared to most people. And now she's even working on all this stuff, this digital stuff about preserving her voice when she dies. She's a big business thinker. She's built an empire. And people don't really, including a Dollywood, which I went to last summer, which I truly enjoyed. And so I find her really interesting. That's how I want to interview her. I mean, I'll take the adorable stuff, and I love her for that, but I want to talk to her about her business mind. I would love to interview her with Taylor Swift, same thing. I don't want to talk about the boyfriends or where the friggin' scarf is. I want to talk about her business, what she's doing with her business, and so that's how I like to approach it.
So let's go back to Facebook since you just mentioned it a minute ago.
Men. That's her code name.
What's the relationship between Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg?
What's the relationship between them? They don't speak to me anymore, although I used to talk to them quite a lot, all the time actually. But they decided I'm the enemy because I'm pointing out the truth about what's going on. I think I was very early talking about the problems back in 2015, 16, after I met Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, and she showed me data, and it was undeniable that what was happening there was going to happen here, especially the abuse, the bots, the abuse of the platforms, the lack of management of the platforms, the use of it by malevolent players for false outcomes. And so, and this is away from all these debates about free speech. It's nothing to do with it. It's about a lot of other things. And Facebook would like us to be arguing about free speech when it's about privacy and malevolent use of very dangerous tools. And so I got Maria really turned me around. Not turned me around, I was never very friendly to Facebook necessarily, but really made me understand the implications. And then after that, I had done some pretty tough reporting on them and pretty tough writing.
So say more about this. You're saying it's not about freedom of speech.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. I think what happens is Facebook would like us to would like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley and AOC to be arguing with each other about whether they're being censored or not, or whether they're not being censored, or if they should take down more. When what this is about is a company that has come in with no regulation whatsoever on it. I just think that how many regulations do you think there are on the modern internet companies? How many do you think? Guess. What? How many do you think? None. How many do you think on banks? 4,099 or whatever. I mean, probably 10,000. I'm probably even understating. On chemical companies, on pharmaceutical. The most powerful companies in this world by far. Top 10 companies are tech companies. The top richest people are tech people, leaving out Saudi Aramco people. But I think the top richest people are all tech people. I believe there might be someone that slips in there from an oil company, an oil country. But these are people who have never been regulated, and the regulation that exists makes it easier for them to get out of responsibility or liability. So they're corporations that are most powerful in history, who have no regulation on them whatsoever, because it's a bummer, and they have no liability. That is really something. I'd like to have that business. And so there's no accountability, there's no regulation, there's no ability to do anything. So that's what I talk. I mean, but they would like us to talk about free speech when it's about privacy. It's about how they manage their platforms. And when you think of them, not like a cigarette company, but like an opiate company, that's when you really start to understand what
So
they're doing.
say more about that. How are they like the Sacklers?
Well, the Sacklers are really the most loathsome people on the planet, I think. I just did an interesting interview with Patrick Radden Keefe. If you read any book this year, read Empire of Pain. It's an astonishing book. I literally want to find the Sacklers and not hit them, because that's wrong, as we know from the Oscars. I really was infuriated, especially I was in San Francisco, where there's a fentanyl crisis, and that was because of the heroin crisis, and that was because of the opiate crisis. It's so clear, the bright lines between the opiate crisis and many of the problems we have today across this country in that area, and it leads right back to the Sacklers. I did an interview with Maura Healey, who's running for governor, who was trying to sue them and tried to put them in jail, and she explained why she couldn't put them in jail, which was also because mostly of the deals that so many regulators made with them over the many years. I'm sorry. The question was,
But back to Facebook.
So why is there no regulation? Because there is no regulation, because our legislators have let us down in the most astonishing degree. I mean, one of the things that I spent a lot of time was talking about that there was no regulation, but on some level, if our government will not do this or has the inability to do this, ultimately it's not their fault anymore, right? Because, why wouldn't you have what you have? And so one of the things I talk about a lot is no longer do I say, isn't it terrible that they do this? It's like, isn't it terrible that our government does not step in at all, whether it's national privacy legislation, transparency, anti-hacking bills. There's dozens of them waiting in the wings, but our government sits around and argues about trans athletes, of which there are one or two in the country, because that's what matters to them, because they're shows. Every one of them is a show, so you can look it up. So what really drives me crazy is that they don't do their jobs, which is to regulate these companies in some fashion, focused in on their use of data, their lack of transparency around their algorithms.
So would you have them self-impose regulations,
No.
sort of the way that, Cook does with Apple? Or
Yeah, but look, we think right now, who is Facebook's regulator? I'm going to call them Facebook, I'm so sick of this meta crap. Who is their regulator?
I was going to actually ask you later what you thought about Meta. I guess
Well,
you
I'll talk about
already
Metaverse, but Facebook is not going to be bringing it to you, just so you know. They're uncreative and they have no ability to do something that's very hard, which is creativity for them. I think Apple will be very key in the Metaverse. I don't think it's not nothing. So I think it's important. I think crypto is important. I think all these things are. But Tim Cook is now the regulator for Facebook. That is good for Tim Cook. Well, okay, one of the world's richest company, I believe that, I think it's almost $3 trillion, is regulating another company, which is now down at $600 million because of what the first company was doing. We may all applaud him and say that's the right thing, but it's wrong that another company is regulating another company and doing the job of our government. And they're unelected, they are unaccountable, and even if they're doing the right thing, it is not the correct way to make decisions in this country. I'm sorry, it just doesn't feel democratic to me. And so I applaud what they're doing, and it's their phone, they can do whatever they want, and in fact, they're doing the right thing. And this is something I interviewed Steve Jobs dozens of times. This is something he talked about for years, this privacy issue. And so they should not be the regulator. We should have they just passed really significant regulation in Europe again. They did GDPR, which was problematic on some levels. They've gotten a lot smarter, and they passed 2 different acts. Marguerite Vestager is now the regulator for the world. A European regulator is regulating most of the world. I have nothing but regard for Marguerite Vestager, but the fact that our Congress can't do it is really problematic. And I joke, I'm interviewing Amy Klobuchar. I interview her a lot because I think she's trying to do effective legislation. She's terrific, actually, on this stuff. But I'm interviewing later this week, and every time I do this, I get a text where it's like, stop beating us up. I'm like, no, pass something. I like Amy, but get going. And it's hard, it's hard because of the partisan situation. And that Kevin McCarthy is talking about orgies right now, because that's the most important thing. Did you know about this? Don't look it up later. But this is what they focus on, right? This is what they're focusing on. It's insane what they're focusing on. It's just madness.
So let's think about technology from a more long-term perspective. So
Sure.
You've been there, in Silicon Valley for a while.
34, a long time,
Yeah,
1996.
I remember, I think one of the first famous moments when you were famous, when you had like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates.
Yes,
and
that's good.
You and Walt Mossberg. And so, you've seen a lot of change.
Sure.
And I think, generally speaking, our societal views and reactions to what these big tech companies have been doing to us and for us over the years keeps changing.
Absolutely.
So tell us about that evolution, because you have a unique perspective.
Yeah.
Walk us through.
So I'm working on my memoir right now because I didn't want to write it for a long time, and then someone threw an enormous amount of money at me, and I thought, it was a lot. So I was like, okay. Because I said no a lot, because I wasn't super interested, one, in remembering a lot of stuff, but at the same time, I thought it was important. So one of the things I open it with is the idea that I like technology. I love technology. I have a perspective on technology, which I often talk about as a Star Trek perspective. It makes it easy for people to understand. Where you have technology does good. It creates you journey, you discover, you meet villains, and then you turn them around, and they become good and part of the Federation and this and that. And so it's always for the good. It has a very sunny outlook on technology. And then you have the Star Wars personality, which is the Empire always strikes back. There's always a Death Star. You always die. The resistance doesn't always win. It's an up and down kind of thing constantly, and there's a very darkness to it. And so I like to prefer to live in the first one, but the second one is where we are, really, in a lot of ways. And so I think there's a possibility. Brad Smith from Microsoft wrote a great book. I think it was called Tools and Weapons. It's about how you can, like a knife is a tool and a weapon. And so you can decide what you're going to do with technology. You look through the COVID thing, technology has been astonishing. It's saved millions of lives with vaccines in such a short time. It's amazing. If you were I wouldn't want to be the person at Kitty Hawk. Imagine you're on the beach in Kitty Hawk and they take off and they flew for 9 seconds, I forget what it was, only 12 or so feet off the ground. You don't want to be the person going, you said 15 feet. Like, what the hell? You said 20 seconds, right? You want to say they flew. That's what the miracle is, the miracle of flight. And so, how it's changed, what a change that brought on all society. And so I went into covering tech really astonished by what it was about to do, especially the internet, because I have a Star Trek personality. And the first thing I did was download a book on the internet, on a college internet. I was teaching, it was a teaching fellowship for 3 months at Duke, and I screwed up the network there temporarily, so I downloaded a cartoon book, which was slow at the time. It was very slow for pictures. And the guy started yelling at me, and I was like, I downloaded a book, and he said, so what? And I go, oh, you're such an idiot. So what? Is everything to be digitized that would be digitized? And I saw that as a positive thing at first, and then a negative thing, because jobs can be digitized, information can be digitized, entertainment can be digitized, everything. And so it made me realize how powerful what was about to happen. It would also create an ability for people to reach out across great distances and connect in ways they never thought before. And so I went out to AOL in the early days, and there was a group of quilters there who had made a quilt entirely online, cooperating with each other. They brought it to AOL's headquarters in Northern Virginia and handed it to Steve Case. This was kind of beautiful in a lot of ways. People who were like-minded found each other in a really positive way and created something great. And this seemed astonishing for gay people. What an amazing thing, like to be so isolated and then be able to find other people. Then the dark side rose up, essentially. And from very early on, it was very apparent that this was going to be a tool
Around when? When would you say?
When I had Ralph Reed at one of my events in the 90s, maybe early 2000s. It was early, because I was noticing that the right wing was spending a lot of time on the internet and doing a lot of really innovative stuff. Two groups of people were doing a lot, the porn people and the right-wing people. And the porn people were super innovative. They just were, it just was. Like, I'll tell you a very brief story. Someone sent me this thing called m2mforsex.com. I think that's what it was called. I'm pretty sure it was M to M for men. Obviously, you know what it means. And so I looked at it, and basically it was, if you were in a part of San Francisco and you wanted to hook up at 4 o'clock and you liked whatever, again, it's San Francisco, so I'm good with anything people want to do that's consenting. There you go, sounds good to me. You put it in, and then it would do whatever it was doing. It was AI, I guess an early version of AI, and then it would match you with someone who wanted that. And I thought, whoa, this is about gay guys finding sex, but it was about everything. And I was immediately like, oh, you could do this with anything. Like a matching algorithm that could find people who were like, I was like, this is this sort of early social media, really, in a lot of ways. And so and there was another one called 6 Apart that did the same thing, that you were 6 apart from anyone on the planet. And I was sort of like, but you are, if you think about networks. And so I called up Jerry Yang, who ran Yahoo at the time, and I said, I have a company you need to buy. He goes, are you selling one? I'm like, no, I don't, I'm a reporter, but this is an important technology. Your company is going to run into a wall because of this, this is where it's going, connection. And so, which of course is what Mark did. And so he laughed at me. He's like, I'm not buying a gay hookup service, Kara. And I was like, you should. It's really important. Just ignore that part of it and just move on. And so one of the things that I was always interested in is how it could improve people's lives. And again, the right wing immediately understood, because they were shut out of media. They couldn't get on CBS. They weren't in the New York Times. They had no media for themselves. They had Fox had just started. I forget what year it started. But they had no, that wasn't, Fox then was not what Fox is now. And so they didn't have any media, they didn't have any access to media, and so they saw the internet as a place where they could start to connect people. And especially people who had views that were like white supremacists, they could find each other. They could suddenly find and create. So these quilters were great, but then guess what? All these white supremacists across the country could find each other very easily and then participate in forums that would
So why
foment.
did they get rid of all the right-wingers then?
No.
Off of Facebook? Would that make
No,
Facebook
no.
better?
No, it's because the architecture is a problem. It's a longer story about how you design. Design is the most important part of all of this. The design of your business is one. I'll just use Facebook example. Its entire business is around advertising, and therefore it's about engagement, and therefore it's about enragement, because enragement equals engagement on these platforms, and therefore that's what they designed for. Google, I'll give a good example. Google, I have a lot of issues with Google's monopoly position in search. They are a monopolist in search. That is very few people will argue with that. Things have to change in that regard somehow. To share, whatever. There's all kinds of ways you can fix that. But when you search on Google, pick anything, you find what you're looking for. I use this example a lot, ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. When you search for the Anti-Defamation League on Google, it comes up the Anti-Defamation League, sometimes some news stories, but it's always around what you're looking. You find that's why Google's so powerful. You find what you're looking for, exactly. And they've honed it to an incredible degree. So they know what you want, they know what you're looking for, they get you what you want. And that's the way it works. When you go over to YouTube, when you do ADL to it, you come up with all kinds of anti-Semitic stuff initially. It's crazy. And I'm like, you don't come up with videotapes about anti-defamation, you come up with anti-Semitic stuff. So it's because the first is designed for speed. Everything's designed for speed because everyone has to sit on their phone and it's like, why isn't it coming? Crazy. Like, this is astonishing what you're getting. But for those who've ever been in a library with cards that you used to look up and then you walk to it, you need to calm down about getting your information so quickly. But I sound like an old person now. But
I
really.
don't think these guys have ever seen that.
No, well, try explaining a payphone to my kids many years ago.
I barely remember. I think I was
Payphone.
6 or 7.
Oh, payphone, you were 6 or 7, okay, thank you. I explained the payphone to my kids. I'm like, you used to pick it up and then you call on it and put money in. And my son at the time was like 5 or 6, and he goes, that's filthy. So it was filthy. Thank God they're gone. We get a cell phone.
Oh, okay,
So I'm sorry, you were talking. So Google you designed for. Let me just finish that. Google you designed for speed, accuracy, and context. Right? That's pretty much what Google is. You get what you're looking for.
So Google's one monopoly.
Right. Yes, but its product is designed so it works. And it does not foment outrage.
Okay.
Facebook. And Twitter, to an extent, is improved, so is Reddit, they're improved, is designed for speed, virality, and engagement. What do you think you're going to get? If you make a building in a certain way, it will cause behaviors in a different way. And online, it gets amplified and weaponized and then abused by malevolent players, so you never know what the actual truth is. And that's what's the most dangerous thing, is you never can see, because of the way it's designed, what's actually happening. And this is why this Facebook campaign is so ironic, because they were designing it to trick everybody. They're doing what their bots and their malevolent players do on Facebook, they were doing to impugn TikTok.
Now, what about Apple and Amazon? Well, while we're talking about the big companies.
All right, well, Amazon is a tremendous service, very innovative, that has really decimated retail. Now, look, some of retail deserves to be decimated because they had bad customer service. This is an astonishing business. They did ride on no taxes for a very long time, and the ability to not make money. Wall Street tolerated it. The retailers can't. They were held to a different standard. I don't know what to say about that, other than that's what happened. Maybe unfair, but that's what happened. That said, they have an amazing. It's not a commerce company. It's a logistics company. That's what it is. It could just logistic anything. And so, I think they have two big issues: marketplace, the fact that they have a marketplace and they are a market. They sell stuff and they're a marketplace. It's a real problem. I think you can't, I was interested in people who did those suitcases that are, the hard shell suitcases, and they're like, we're never going on Amazon because they're going to copy us and then put us out of business. And what was fascinating is they didn't put them out of business, but they did it anyway. You saw a copy of their particular innovation on it. And so they're selling things, they know the pricing, they have all kinds of information, even though they pretend there's a wall, there's not, or they have a lot of insight. And so they're both in the selling business and the marketplace business. The second thing is they can then move into adjacent businesses or nearby businesses like entertainment, and money is no object. And so they can, it's like playing against a player that it's just unfair. It's unfair, it may not be illegal, so they can spend $50 million on an Oscar camp. Because who won the Oscars this year? Apple and Netflix. That's who won the Oscars this year. Not any of the big studios. So it's a very not level playing field because they're there to sell iPhones and toilet paper or whatever, and the others are actually in the entertainment business. So that's their problem. And I think probably the fact that they don't spin off AWS is just they should, because it's a good business decision. That's not illegal or whatever, I just think they should. Apple has an app store that is a monopoly in its area because you don't choose between Android and Apple. You're either an Apple person or an Android person, so it's a monopoly in its space. Now, I have some sympathy for their arguments about safety and control. The App Store is a much more safe place than Android, and it just is. At the same time, they don't need to have that much control and charge that much for it. You can't succeed without being on the App Store. That is it just is. And they have to be regulated, perhaps some laws, changing of the fees, maybe some government oversight in some way over that. That seems very fixable to me. Their issues in China are another issue altogether. They've made a trade with China to be in that country.
Before we get to China,
Yeah.
so what's the difference between our tech monopolies, if any, as compared to
Very much.
the robber barons of the past?
Oh, very much. I think what's happened is these are people that really do provide incredibly useful services that people love, and that antitrust laws today and everything else that might govern them doesn't really govern them. And the antitrust, I think it's 100 years old, whatever. It's real. You can read Amy Klobuchar's giant book about it. She wrote a big. Did you ever see it? It's a huge antitrust book. I used to tell her to kill a poodle with it, but I didn't try at all. But she talks about this a lot, about that we have antitrust laws that don't matter. So one of the things I think you have to keep in mind with your business students is these companies are different. There's no such thing as big tech. Apple hates Facebook. You know, Microsoft and Apple are more aligned than you think, right? You have Google sort of standing over here, not liking Facebook necessarily, competing with Apple. So they're all different birds, right? And so we treat them like they're one big thing as if they're moving together. And each individually has a different issue we have to face in terms of how to deal with it. What they all come down to is incredible market power in areas where innovation then doesn't get to happen. And so when you look at the level of innovation, like I was talking to a bunch of VCs when I was in Silicon Valley, they will not invest in search. They will not invest in commerce very much, or they're very slow to do so because of Amazon. They will absolutely not invest in social media right now because of Facebook, although seeing what happened with TikTok, they're like, oh, it looks like you can breach the moat there. And so if VCs are saying this and they're not going to invest in areas, you're going to get no competition, and you're not going to, and if they're so big and they own the market so much and they have consumers in their lock because of the information they own, I mean, Google knows you're all here today if they wanted to, right? Or one of them does. And so the fact that they have no oversight is really problematic individually, not collectively, because there's no collective going on.
So we have big tech and we have big banks. So what's
Right.
the difference in culture and the effects on our life between Silicon Valley versus Wall Street?
Well, I mean, at least big guys admit that they're thuggish, right? They kind of like, we're making money, that's what we're doing. And these tell the tech companies, like, we're trying to make your world better. I'm like, really? How is it that I get a map and maybe some email and this and that, you get all my information and then you make money off my information and then you keep all that information and you're the richest people in the world and I get a map. You know, you're such cheap dates, all of you. You're such cheap dates. And so the trade is bad, it's bad trade. At least the Wall Street people, you know, I get it. They don't pretend they're doing what, except what they're doing. Now, they're under real siege because of a lot of stuff that's going on. I wouldn't say the democratization, because Robinhood's way off from its former high, but that's probably, I'm not a
Is
fan.
that gonna go out?
Go out, it went out, it went public. It's going down, it's like way down 80%, something like that. I think there's a real
Is
movement.
that a start of a new kind of innovation, or is that?
I think what's
just
happening
it's over?
with blockchain and this technology around finance is really interesting, because it spreads it. There's all these that's one area of huge innovation. There's 3 areas of huge innovation.
Oh, great, that was my question before I turn it over.
Okay, climate tech. There's some really fantastic stuff going on in climate tech. And that's not going to solve every problem, but there's lots of investment in that that's really interesting. It's a long road, because it's what's going to, everything and then all at once is the way climate change is going to go. Although we're seeing bits and pieces of it right now. So there's climate change tech. I think there's innovation, there's competition. Where there's competition, it's always better, no matter how you slice it. Transportation, there's so many interesting new innovations. Everyone talks about Elon and Tesla, but there's lots and lots of really cool innovation around transportation. And I think except not United Airlines, which still sucks. Pandemic, I can report, they're up to their same horrible tricks. I mean, really, honest. And you're welcome for the $5 billion, United, from the U.S. taxpayer that you gave to your executives. Thanks for that. But transportation overall is there's all kinds of really interesting people moving into that space. Food tech is really interesting. Psychedelics, you said you can't teach that here, you should teach that here. It's really interesting. Not because you all want to take it, fine, whatever, but we had a whole day of it at my conference.
We'll have some samples of mushrooms.
No, we will not. It's actually interestingly being funded by a lot of internet people. I'm glad they're taking their filthy money and doing that, because there's a lot of stuff going on in Oregon and other states about PTSD, about depression, some of this stuff is very promising, and it got criminalized in a way that shouldn't have had, because the Nixon administration has lost its ever-loving mind. And so since then, we think these things they don't have efficacy. If you think opiates are not good, this stuff, we'll see, but it definitely has a lot of promise in so many areas: depression, PTSD, eating disorders. Climate change, psychedelics, and healthcare, I think, has gotten a real kick in the pants. Yeah, that kind of stuff. You see competition is what I'm talking about.
So is big tech, the big companies, sort of the big 6 or the big 10, depending on how you count it, are those going to be gone?
No, Apple's never going to be big. Apple's going to be is going bigger. It's just they really are so they've managed to stay for a bunch of old guys. There's a lot of old guys. They managed to stay incredibly innovative in terms of what they're doing and how they're making stuff and rolling out AirPods or whatever they make. And now surrounding you with software. Now they're moving into a subscription bundle. And one of the biggest trends that I think we talked about on Pivot last week was this we call it, I've been talking about for years, a rundle, a recurring revenue bundle, where you offer people things. And so you can move it up and down the economic chain. If it's an In-N-Out burger, you get an extra one or whatever. It's not loyalty programs, but it's a full relationship with your customer and what they would trust you to do. And so Apple, you have a relationship with them. What else can they give you? Could they come to your home and fix your phone? Would you trust them with something else and that's adjacent? You probably would. Same thing with Amazon, has a very strong relationship and a knowledge about its customers. If they protect your privacy and you consent to the things, that's fine. That's a good trade. And I'm getting this for that, and I pay this fee. There's a couple Disney is another company that could have that relationship with people. So I think about companies that consumers have, not just consumers, businesses or consumers have a significant relationship with, that are important, that then you have a much more back and forth, honest discussion about the trade versus this era where they just come in and take your information and tell you not what they're going to do with it, and then it gets hijacked by malevolent players.
So Facebook and Twitter are also here.
I think Facebook's in big trouble. I think they're in big trouble. I've seen it before with some other companies. They're big, and so that's one of the issues. But one of the fascinating things, if you look at online advertising, it was a duopoly between Google and Facebook. Now, of course, it's another big company, but Amazon has increased its share of the online advertising market significantly. And so you're not seeing new players, but you're starting to see something happening there. The second thing is the Metaverse, which is a very important concept. where we already live in the metaverse, by the way. If you go to gaming, if you use gaming or anything else, they're betting billions and billions of dollars on this. But it's a huge technology challenge, and it's also a creativity challenge. So I see Apple and Microsoft being big players. Their purchase of Activision, very important purchase. They'll be very big players in the metaverse. And so you have to have creativity and computing, ability to compute. So you can see Amazon being part of it in some commerce way. You can see Apple, they'll just be bigger. They'll be $4, $5, $6 trillion companies. I think Facebook, is gonna have a problem.
All right, so I should stop hogging up your time and let's open it out. Anybody who has a question?
Oh, you have to get up. Oh, we go to say them. Go ahead. I'll repeat them. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. This is so interesting.
No problem.
My question is, do you think Zuckerberg is going to be successful in his vision of the metaverse? And if not, who's the most credible threat?
Apple. No, I don't think he is. I think he had a real problem, which is his social media network sucks and fucks with people, and he just decided to change his name.
So not Microsoft?
Microsoft and Apple, I think, are the ones I'm looking at. There's all kinds of innovative companies. Snapchat is doing some fantastic stuff around the metaverse that is really interesting. That guy, I call him the chief product officer of Facebook because all they do is shoplift his ideas and try hard to copy him. I hate people who don't innovate. Like, I really do. I really despise that. I mean, I don't like it. I think it's the only way you succeed is by building great products. Think about it. All you people who are in businesses, don't copy people. Make great products. You can do that, but then you're kind of a hack, right? So make great products, and you will succeed. That is,
We need to quote you on that.
you do. You will. It's ridiculous to copy. I mean, you can do it, but ugh. So, like, they couldn't make TikTok. Look at that. They couldn't make TikTok. Why? Because they're not creative, as people at TikTok are. And they did another thing, which is to change the algorithm so it's about your interest versus setting people against each other, kind of stuff. So I think they're going to be great. I think it'll be slow. I mean, gaming first. There'll be some workplace stuff. There's some interesting. The Microsoft stuff is weird because nobody has legs, which is weird. I keep calling them like, when are you putting on legs? But it's in its crude stages, but you'll be living. Apple's coming out with some glasses, I think, and I think they'll be fantastic. Apple's also working in the car area, quietly. But I think that the Apple glasses is where, the iPhone is where everything changed. And this stuff was around before apps and things, not apps particularly, but there were phones like this, and then Apple with the App Store, and that was that. I think took over everything. So anyway, let's start here.
Hi, Kara. Thanks for being here. I listened to both of your podcasts, and although I would never do this, it is very easy to skip through the ads.
Yes,
And
I think I'm a fantastic reader of ads.
Curious what you could tell us about the business of podcasts, and whether it seems almost in a way to me kind of like a linear TV model.
In a way.
Even today, I'm just curious if you see any format
Yes.
innovations on the horizon to make it a better business.
Well, it's interesting. We're thinking about that a lot with Pivot, for example. Sway, not so much. I'll be honest with you, Box Media is a little more innovative than the Times is around changing, and it works for them, so that's what they do, right? So one of the things, and I have a lot more control of Pivot, so when Scott and I are very, what do we do next and stuff. So two things. Advertising makes us a lot of money. It really does. Everyone was like, don't go. I started podcasting with an intern. I was running the Rico website and went to Jim Bankoff. This is how good a CEO is. And I said, I'm running this, but I'm leaving, and I'm going to do this podcast thing. This was 8 years ago. It wasn't existing. It wasn't, and he's like, okay, chat, right? Okay, sounds good. And I did it with one intern. I started doing it. We made money from the friggin' get-go. It was crazy. And then everyone was like, you can't make money in podcasts. I'm like, yeah, I can. It's terrible over here. Don't come over here. I was like, are you kidding me? We're making millions of dollars. We made it with a tiny staff. It was crazy when I saw the economics of it. And the CPMs were good, and you didn't have to be that big. You could do really good with Joe Rogan and stuff like that. He was from out of nowhere. So you could make a lot of money on advertising, or the guys from John Lovett, those guys. Crooked Media. So you can make money like that. So it's very hard to move away from it because it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's still, everyone's like waiting for it to crash, but it kind of hasn't. And at some point they're like, all these like, you know, Tuft and Needle and whatever, your advertisers, they're gonna go to business. You know, they're not good advertisers. I'm like, well, their checks cash just as well as anybody else's. So, and then we've now moved to bigger like it's sort of like cable. They started off with Cialis and then, well, they still have Cialis. And then they moved up, you know, we're getting like big advertisers now. So now, you know, we had the mattress people, now we have LinkedIn, we have various Microsoft, Facebooks. I don't know why they advertise on my podcast, but they do. And I'm always like, here's an ad for Facebook, I hate them. It's weird. I was like, okay, I'll take your money and insult you. So I don't do that. Those are never buys. So I try to get them all on my podcast. But it's very hard because they buy everywhere. And so that's one thing. So now we're thinking, we just did an event. So we're thinking about live events. And I've made a fortune doing live events all my life, doing the code conference before that whole thing stayed. Another area everyone was like, can't we make money? I'm like, no, don't do it. You know, no one ever came for me. I was like, it's really lucrative for a very, you know, small amount of effort. And so we're doing events, so we're trying to do other revenue streams. We're talking about some premium stuff right now. Now we're still gonna have the free part of it, but what would premium look like? We're having that discussion now. And you'd be surprised how quickly, like as Substack is showing for a lot of individual writers, how quickly you could get to some real money doing it. And again, I have the tiniest staff. I can't believe how few people are working for Pivot. And then now we're talking about commerce, maybe something, what would we recommend, like Wirecutter does at the New York Times. So we're constantly thinking of that, of like what else can we do? Because I want to have a lot of, one of the things I've had with my businesses is I've always been, I was in the newspaper business and I was like, classifieds aren't gonna last. You know, I kept saying that at a very young age to Don Graham. And then I was like, you have to have other things, like what are the other things? And so I'm always thinking about other things. Of course, Scott wants to start a drug business on the side, but we're not going to be doing that. That would be great for money-wise, but we think about that a lot. Right now, the ad business is pretty damn good. As for the content, we chop it up a lot now. We've been chopping it up. We've been doing it different places. Although, again, when you look at, we can see how long people stay, listen to it. We have an astonishing listen rate. People listen almost to the end. Like, it's crazy. Sway doesn't have that. Like, lots of podcasts don't have it. People like to see what awful things Scott's going to say, and I'm going to hit him right until the end. So, and then we try to keep it different. We try to
Wait for the predictions.
Yeah, predictions. We try to do everything. We change all the time. We love changing. And then we'll go out and fire and blast to glory or at some point. You know. So anyway, over here.
I got an email from the law school and I popped over here. I've never heard your podcast. It's been interesting to come here and listen to you talk. You said a lot of things that I was really interested in, particularly transportation. But as I was listening, I came up with 3 questions. One is like 30,000 foot view, another is like a 10,000 foot view, and the third is like right here at ground level.
Well, for transportation. For transport.
No,
For everything?
That's separate, but.
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, someday here's 30,000 per view. You're going to die someday. So you better think about that all the time. And I recommend you listen to a speech by Steve Jobs when he thought he wasn't going to die. Actually, that he did. He almost died once, and then he got better, and then he died for the same thing. I would think about that all the time. Right? That's a 30,000. Like, let's be clear. Ben Frank, an amazing innovator.
I meant I had a 30,000 foot view question.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. That's my 30,000 foot view for everyone.
Or the 10,000 foot, but I'm just going to go with the 10.
Okay, go for the 10.
You had mentioned always being on your phone.
Yeah.
When we first started, and I was foiled. I was hesitant to even pull out my phone to write.
You can do that.
I was very disappointed to have to not use a pencil and pen. But I'm wondering if it's practical to use biosensors on a mass level to aggregate, analyze, and solve health crisis with minimal malevolent actors.
That's a tough one. You know, I mean, a lot of people didn't cooperate with a lot of COVID stuff, which is really interesting. They didn't report, they didn't do stuff. And these are in our, but then in Taiwan, they really did, and they handled it. There's a woman who runs, a trans woman who runs tech for them who's astonishing. The stuff they did around COVID was really impressive, using lots of that stuff. they could tell. And, you know, there's a thing called the Aura ring that you can wear. There's all kinds of, that's the one I was wearing through COVID. It really, really can tell you when you're sick. It's crazy. Some of that has privacy issues, obviously. Now, healthcare has always been better on privacy than other places, and that's why it's been so slow to innovate. And the idea of putting markers on ourselves is, I think, an anathema to most people in general, and is the most, yes, exactly.
But I see the benefit.
Yes, you do see the benefit. There are other ways to do it and randomize it in lots of ways. What I do think we can solve is the sort of low-hanging fruit, which is healthcare records, healthcare insurance, the way we do healthcare is insane. Like going into telehealth has really taken off during COVID. That's one thing you're seeing some real benefits that you have to do. So I think there's lots of stuff to innovate at the bottom before slapping something on everybody. I suspect, if I had to guess, everyone's going to have glasses, not phones, or something in their eye. Google's been working on a contact lens, and that gives you information. And even if you make fun of Google Glass, it's the right idea. It's the correct movement in that direction. I was there when they invented Google Glass, and I got stuck on a boat with all these Google people wearing it, and they wouldn't give me one. And whenever you go to a Google event, they have the best shrimp. Like, it's really good shrimp, and I love shrimp. And so I sat by the shrimp table, just eating giant shrimp while they were all trying to talk to each other with Google Glass. And what you had to say is, okay, Google, when you wanted to do something. And they kept turning on each other's headsets because of the sound thing. And it was like, I was like, this is the end. Fuck. Oh, it's delicious, and I'm going to die someday. No, so I think there's just a question of how you can protect people's, if there's a randomized way of doing it in some fashion. I always think of the worst case scenarios, which is that the government will be tracking you everywhere, and I'm not a paranoid person, but it's too good, you know, it's too good to, and they do it in China and other countries very much so, and I think I would watch China. It's a surveillance economy, that's what it is, and you know, people don't like it, and I have great regard for their expertise and their soon-to-be dominance in a lot of areas, but boy, that's an interesting experiment in monitoring people. But we do it ourselves. We let people do that. We carry these things. These are monitoring devices, no matter how you slice it. I turn off everything. I have little UV things I put in my computers, and I'm not a paranoid person, but I don't sign up to Google. I don't would you like to sign up to make your experience better? No, like your fucking worst experience. Thank you. But it's an issue. It's going to be an issue. But remember, get busy, you're going to die.
Hi, Kara. Miriam here. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
And I'm really impressed with your success in tech journalism.
Thank you.
And in the country where I'm from, that's a very male-dominated industry. So I was wondering
What country?
Germany. I was wondering if there have been any major experiences where you felt you were being treated differently because you're a woman, and so if you have any advice for younger women who are starting their careers in male-dominated industries.
Sure, I'll say something. All right, so I have not, because I'm an obnoxious person, as you can see. I have spent, I don't know what it is. I just say it out loud when it's happened to me. There is a massive sexism problem in the tech industry. I've written about it quite a lot. I don't understand it. It's not good for business. It can't be that only straight white men are the only people who know how to do things. It just can't. I mean, I have 3 straight white. I don't know about baby, but so far the top ones are straight. I have 3 sons. They're great, but come on, I love them. But, I think the girl's going to outshine them, honestly. And she is. That's just a fact. So I spent a lot of time writing about it. Why is it? It's not. There's all these studies about diversity being better, and that's not being woke or anything else. There's study after study after study that shows you. I try to appeal to their greed. I think what happens is the thing I say a lot, which is it's not a meritocracy. They think it's a meritocracy, and it's a mirrorocracy. Whatever they see that's like that, they like. I'm not sure what to do because different people are different. I'm super obnoxious, but other people are not, right? So how do you do that when you're not, you don't want to be in a constant fight all day with people. Honestly, sometimes the numbers, I just was doing a thing over at Harvard, and these numbers that I got someone to collect for me, it's down to 2% investing in women-run companies, which is from 6. it's crazy during the pandemic, in the past couple of years. Are women 2%, it's 4% stupider now? I don't know. What happened? No, of course not. And is there less money? No, there's more money. It's just people's needed comfort, and so they look at someone and say, you know, which someone, a VC once said to me, he goes, well, Kara, if there was a Marcia Zuckerberg, maybe people would invest in women. I was like, I want to hit you so hard. Again, I don't do that because it's the wrong thing to do. And no matter who you are, you're a famous star. So I spent a lot of time calling attention to it and trying to put out the facts. I think the two most important things are investing in women entrepreneurs or people of color. It's the same for people of color, it's the same thing, it doesn't matter. And continue to educate the people in power about this stuff and making it more than a stack rank thing. It's always on the list of these CEOs, but it's never near the top, and so they never get to it. And then having women on cap tables, being rich, you know, having money, and that's where you really see the big difference of cap tables of these companies. It's very, very problematic. And so, and I try to write about it a lot. One of the things I did many years ago, I wrote the Men and No Women of Facebook, which I just put up all their pictures, and I made funny comments under them. I go, nice hair, he's different from that guy because he's brown hair. You know, I was just making fun of the whole thing. And so and then I got a call from Marla, it doesn't look fair. I'm like, you have literally, it's all white guys and an Asian guy or something. Like, come on, like, give me a break. And then they hired Cheryl, and she accounts for 10 women apparently. And so I continue to push them. And I was telling the story the other day on a panel I was on. My greatest achievement was a lead I wrote about this one. The boards of companies. It's crazy. Boards are like this too. It's nuts. There's plenty of qualified people to be on boards. I mean, really, you can't do the STEM argument. You can't do this argument. They have like 10 arguments. And boards, there's plenty of people to pick from. Well, they just pick from people who they're comfortable with. And so, board of Twitter was doing really bad at the time, had 10 white men on it. And I was like, that's mathematically impossible. These can't be the finest we can find, right? And so, or maybe they think they are. Except they were running the company into a wall like a clown car every 5 minutes. And so I was like, these are idiots. How do they pick these people? And so, sorry, I said, on the board of Twitter, which has 3 Peters and a Dick, which I was like, this is such a good, you know, it's like a penis joke, obviously. So the head of Twitter called me and said, he was a stand-up comic, he goes, that was really funny. And I said, I know. I said, the editor approved it right away. I was the editor. You know? And so that's the greatest thing about running your own stuff. You can prove yourself very quickly. And so I had an argument with him. I said, this is ridiculous. You have 10 white men. How did this happen? You have a diverse product that's used by, you know, all kinds of people, and this is what you pick. Well, you know, and he walked right into it. He goes, we have standards, you know. And I was like, so these people are fucking up everything, because I think we can all agree you suck right now. But you know, standards, they only use the word standards when it comes to women and people we can't find, you know, not the right people. I struggle with all the time with my events. That's why this is my last year to do code, the big, I took 20 years. I did pivot, I could find diverse people at startups, and I'm so tired of not being able to be as diverse as I get, bring me fresh ideas. And I very much like the bigger people I cover, some of them, but we have to start investing in this area. I don't quite know how it's going to happen. Otherwise, you just have to speak up, unfortunately, and it shouldn't be on you, but it is. Or get allies, male allies and things like that. So.
I really appreciate your efforts there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Unpopular opinion, but I think I'm from the school of thought where I think that blaming Facebook for problems that are really in our society or in our government is just
Right.
they're being manifested in Facebook. And so the example that you gave that white supremacists were using this platform to cook these more extreme ideas. Where do we draw that line where we say, oh yeah, that this is Facebook's fault or Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah, I know this. This is Facebook's favorite thing to do. Let me just say, well, I'm not blaming you. I don't know if you work at Facebook or not, but here's the deal. Yes, they do, but they build their platforms in a sloppy, unmanaged style and don't account for mistakes. They don't account for problems. And they grow, their motto was move fast and break things. Okay? It wasn't change things. It It wasn't transform things, it wasn't make things better, it was break things. Now that's a software term, so I'm gonna let them have a wide berth on that one. But the fact of the matter is they continue to build platforms and just look at Frances Haugen's stuff, away from the more sensational stuff around teen girls. The stuff they're doing in foreign countries and the way they have people who don't speak the language and they're putting up platforms and letting anything happen. You wouldn't tolerate that in a restaurant, you wouldn't tolerate that in a hospital, you wouldn't tolerate that in a taxi service. You wouldn't, but we let them do it. And so I have a problem is that they're running their business badly and it creates problems. And then when we say fix it, they're like, hey, free speech. Like, no, that is not. You don't do it to any other business in society. Like businesses, you're not giving money to black people. Hey, we get to decide who we're gonna give money to. Hey, we're not redlining, although that's what we're doing, but hey, it's none of your business. That's the way people are. They want to say. It's just ridiculous. It's not how we do any other thing, and that's what drives me crazy. And the sloppiness is what gets me. When I was there, I went and saw their version of Live. They show it to reporters before. Walked in the room, I looked at Live, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. It's copying, once again, over on Twitter they're doing it, but okay. It's a nice version of their thing. I'm just curious, what happens if someone starts killing people? And say someone puts a GoPro on their head and starts a mass murder. What's your plan? Silence. We'll turn it off. Well, what if it gets recopied and copied again? What about bullying? What about suicides? What about racism? What about when it starts to be used malevolently? They're not figuring in malevolence. And so, Kara, you're such a bummer. They literally said that to me. I'm like, yeah, I'm a fucking bummer. I've studied human history, and guess what? Any tool that people have, people abuse. So if they manage it badly. That's what drives me crazy about them. I don't care if they manage it badly and they have a huge impact, and therefore they have corporate responsibility not to poison people. They just do, and I don't blame them for society. White supremacists would have existed no matter what. They just don't seem to go away, right? This is a cancer on humanity. But the fact of the matter is they can do a better job in Alex Jones. Last thing, I'll stop Randy. Alex Jones, he violated their rules I counted them 162 times. I interviewed Mark Zuckerberg. I'm like, Mark, they violated your rules dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Your rules, not society's rules, the ones you wrote. Well, Kara, it's a complicated situation. They violated your rules. Are you going to enforce your rules, or they're just fake? Like whatever. Oh, we don't know. I said they're literally attacking the parents of people whose kids were murdered, and they're breaking your rules, and they're making things up, and they're lying, and they're malevolent, and you can remove them because you're a private company, you're not the government. Well, I really believe in free speech. I said, this is craziness. This is crazy. I said, in 3 weeks you're going to take them off. That's what they did. That's what they did 3 weeks later, just because he felt like it, right? And that's my problem, is they have no decency around things that are so apparent, and they would like to read about what they just did, because it's everything, how they think, create confusion. It's very Trumpian. It's very, create lies, create confusion. And the last thing I'll say, because I sound like a crazy person, but I wrote a piece, and I'm not going to tell you when I wrote it, where I said, I should read from it, but I know what I wrote. I said, what if after the election, Donald Trump decides that it's a lie and goes around and uses social media, etc., all these things, and keeps saying it's a lie, the election was stolen, and he uses all the way it moves out, and these platforms don't stop some of this stuff because they say it's opinion, which it wasn't, and they use all kinds of tricky methods, which they do, and bots and this and that, and malevolently try to attack that the election was stolen, say it was stolen. And then, what if he then tells his followers to stop it, to stop the election from the inauguration from happening, to stop it from being certified? What then? I wrote that piece. I got so much flack from Twitter and Facebook. Kara, that's never going to happen. Well, what do you think happened? I wrote that in 2019. Okay? I think they could, I'm just myself, and I think they could do a better job running their business. And that's my problem. And they don't mind taking your information and using it for their own purposes and not telling you. You have to be thinking. They're not to blame for all of society, but they sure do a good job of amplifying and weaponizing all the problems we have. They're really good at that. And I'm sorry, I I won't tolerate it. I have 4 kids. I won't tolerate it. I don't want to live in that world like that. Anyway, sorry, I'm not attacking you at all. Piss me off.
So people pointed out that you wrote just one newspaper a century, you would cover very different things, and the more you subdivide it, the more you might mistake noise for signal, and the more you end up outraging yourself. And so you get to the point where every day you read articles that make you sad, and then you switch to another tab to make you happy again. And so I wonder, as a person who creates this content, what's the case for reading it and listening to it?
We try to actually write about happy things too. Like I actually do spend a lot. Like, by the way, go see Coda. It's very happy. Apple's leaning into happy there, which I think is great. I agree with you. I think sometimes you're right that it's like the plane landed in Chicago yesterday safely and everybody was happy except for one guy. It's really not the story, right? And so I think we do spend a lot of time focusing on the negative. That said, I look at something like Ukraine and the coverage. I think it's fantastic. It's not good news, but I think it's very fair. I think it's been balanced. I don't need to use that term. I accept on Fox News, which is, I don't know what they're doing over there. But I think I see that in a really good way. I see actually media being used in a real, social media being used in a really good way. Some of it's propaganda by Ukraine, by the way, which we know about this country in World War II and stuff like that. So I do worry that the constant drumbeat of negativity and partisanship does make people turn off and remove themselves from everything. That said, you look at, there's lots of delightful, wonderful things on Twitter, on TikTok, on where your kids are getting their information. I tend not to compliment YouTube, but my son uses it beautifully. Again, he gets so much information. And so I think what we have to do is surface the really great and creative stuff and sort of de-surface. And they're doing that, some of these companies, some of the louder and screamier and partisan stuff and stupid stuff. And you see a lot of these executives. The CEO of YouTube is a really interesting woman. They started Google in her garage. She has just 6 or 7 children, I forget. She thinks of that a lot, and I do think, and she doesn't want to have their service be used for this, right? But you can also, as I said, it can also uplift and bring people together in some ways. And I think you see glimmers of it all over the place. And the media could do a lot better job of focusing in not happy news, because I think that's also kind of awful, but really like what works, solutions. We spent a lot of time. I did an interesting interview with London Breed in San Francisco over the fentanyl crisis in the Tenderloin. And we spent quite a bit of the interview talking about solutions. Like, okay, give me 6 solutions. Let's talk about this. What are you doing with this? What are you doing with this? Not to beat up on her about what's clearly a crisis, a terrible tragedy. And so, there is that, if it leads kind of thing. I don't know if you're ever going to get out of media in some ways. But you can tell truthful stories, I guess. Try to do more truthful stories. I'm really hard by the Ukraine coverage. I'm not depressed by it. I think it's a human tragedy, but it's also a tragedy, a story of hope and inspiration. I listened to these interviews I just did with these 2 reporters. I felt great about journalism after I talked to those 2. I really did. They were fighting the good fight, so I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask a little bit about antitrust and regulation. So you touched on the fact that all of our big tech companies have different varieties of anti-competitive streaks. And I'm wondering if you think that it's possible, especially given some of the states in Congress, to pass anything kind of like a Glass-Steagall for tech that has a silver bullet effect. And if so, what is the regulation or set of regulations you would pass to address some of the issues?
I'm not a lawyer, and you should read Amy's book. It has a lot of proposals. But I don't think they're going to pass anything. I just don't. I think it's going to be really difficult for a lot of these cases to win in court because of current law. It has to pass on the congressional level. There has to be a new act, a Sherman antitrust. I think for the modern age, that was that 1913. It's crazy. And it has to be much more thoughtful. It is an area of bipartisanship, actually, which is interesting, aside from all the screaminess of Ted Cruz, but which you should never listen. If you want to feel better, don't listen to him. But there's a lot of real coming together. I interviewed Ken Buck. One of the things I try to do is interview people I don't agree with, especially Ken Buck is a very conservative, unvaccinated congressman from Colorado, allegedly unvaccinated. I think he is vaccinated. And he and I, he is on the same page as David Cicilline, who is so opposite him on how to fix this. And so I just don't think they're going to pass it in time. And then someone like Lena Khan, who's running the FTC, is really hamstrung by, also they haven't even passed the increases in $5 million or something for her agency. I mean, she's, I can't believe the US government can't compete, but they really can't compete. And so I don't know what would prompt, because the problem is you really kind of like these companies, right? Consumers come, it's hard. I think there's growing feeling that something's going to happen, maybe from the states attorney generals, and obviously from Europe. So there'll be something that will happen. I don't know about antitrust. It's a very slow way. You talk to anyone, whether it was, they have some very good lawyers in the Trump administration on antitrust, who kept their heads down. Even the ones today, they all agree. It's like, we really can't win in this battle. It's too fast moving, and the laws need to be updated rather significantly. So I don't know.
Thanks. Hi, Kara. Another policy question for you. This time around, Section 230.
Yes.
So people might argue that Section 230 has allowed the internet and social media to flourish in a lot of good ways over the past few years. However, obviously, it creates a blind spot and opens up a lot of doors for those malicious people on the internet. What do you think needs to be regulated by companies versus the government? And if you could rewrite Section 230, what are some main points you would point out?
Again, I'm not a lawyer. Again, I'm not a legislator. But I think the idea of getting rid of it is ridiculous. It would be all hell would break loose, right? Like, at the same time, the lack of any liability is a real, gosh, that's crazy, right? Like, who isn't liable for something? My brother's a lawyer, I like lawyers, but boy, can they cause trouble, and it's not such a bad thing to have, as a journalist, we think about liability. Everybody who has a business thinks about liability all the time, probably too much. They don't have any, right? And so, by the way, newspapers are protected by Section 230 too, regular news organizations, not newspapers necessarily. And so you have to think really hard because one of the things that's not going away is the First Amendment, right? So they're not going to legislate around that, and that's where we should not get near. But there's all kinds of privacy and data and information stuff we can change first. I suspect there has to be some kind of liability of companies over a certain size if this happens, that they can write intelligently. I think it still does protect smaller companies, it does protect news organizations from unnecessary litigation, essentially. And that's why I wrote about it when it happened, because it was part of a bigger act called the Communications Decency Act, most of which got declared unconstitutional. It was all about porn, I think it was at the time. And so you have to really think hard if you're going to mess with something that's worked really well. At the same time, do the world's richest company need this much protection? And you have to differentiate between them and everybody else who's protected by it. I think that's the difficulty. I would recommend a book by Jeff Kossoff, who is the smartest person on this topic. He's got some really interesting, he's on Twitter quite a lot and talks about it. And I tend to take my cues from him because I found him to be the smartest person to talk about the topic. But lots of people debate it. But when, like, I don't know, was it Holly who gets up there? Just like, don't listen to him. They don't know what they're talking about. He's actually quite smart and pretends he's stupid on television. But, it's so funny. They're all like, elitist. I'm like, Harvard. Elitist Stanford. They're all from those places. That's my favorite part of that whole thing. I'm like, I can get into those schools myself.
Hi, Kara. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm a huge fan. So actually, this year is the first year that Columbia Business School has more graduates going into tech than finance.
Yeah.
That trend compared to the fact that one argues we're in an era of stakeholder capitalism where without action, maybe businesses are responsible for, moving towards social good actions that also deliver shareholder return. As a student going into a big tech company after graduation and hopefully, a future manager in one of these
Where are you
companies,
going?
I'm going to Amazon.
Oh, cool.
What can we be
I
doing?
like the new
They're
CEO.
one of our largest.
Sure they are. They're sucking up everyone on the top and the bottom.
They are equivalent to the Wall Streeters.
They are. They're sucking, but not just at the higher levels, but even they're paying more. Restaurants are going crazy because of fast food places are going crazy because of Amazon.
I'm curious, as a future manager in that company, what can I be doing to make tech better?
Stop their ridiculous incessant attacks on unions and let the workers unionize. That's I know they don't want to, but I think it's, unions have let workers down too, let's be honest, like the unions, they have gotten, like, as Scott always says, the minimum wage has been, has gone from $7 to $7, like, it's ridiculous what we pay our lowest wage workers. At this point, the government needs to just say, we need to have a $25 minimum wage, or whatever the price, and then just say, suck it up, businesses. They will suck it up, by the way, they don't have to pay their CEOs quite as much, they just, at this point, the companies aren't going to do it, and Amazon will do it if they need the help, but and unions aren't going to do it. They're not going to help. So, and thinking about workers on every level of your company, I think you don't think about that. Like a company like Amazon, it touches every economic scale and stuff like that. So I would think, I happen to like the new CEO. I've known him for a long time. I think he's a little nicer than Jeff. Although he did run, we had a big argument over Recognition, which was their facial surveillance software. But he gave as good as he got. At least Jeff won't do that anymore, because I don't know where he lives, in some planet that doesn't exist for the rest of us. But he used to be so normal and so crazy. Whatever. Good for him. Good for him.
Who's more crazy, him or Elon Musk?
Oh, Jeff isn't crazy at all. Elon. I like you. I shouldn't. I hate how much I like you. Literally, you're so offensive and awful, but you're very funny. But I try not to take him too seriously, although I think he has moral power. He should behave. He should call Senator Warren Senator Cameron. He needs to stop that. But he won't. He just won't. So I think you have to think about every level of your company, right? I don't know if you, but as a whole, instead of, you have to think of the responsibility of the whole company and be open to criticism and not just say, oh, press sucks or critics suck. Like, really listen to what people are saying to you. And I think that's what happens. You get in these companies, it becomes cult-like. And you start to say, well, that's unfair, we're trying to be our best. I think that's, be more open-minded to your critics and stuff. I try to listen, I respond to everyone on Twitter who says some shitty thing about some coverage I did. And I'll have an argument, but sometimes I'm like, you're right, I screwed up there. I think that's
About 2 more questions.
If you don't mind, I'll finish them because they're standing. Go ahead.
I have a very similar question. So
Sure.
I'll ask, what technology trend are you most optimistic about? And if you were graduating from business school today, what technology company would you work for?
Oh, oddly enough, I was offered a job at every one of these companies when they started, and I'm like, why do I want to work for you? And now I'm like, I wish I was a billionaire. I would be so evil as a billionaire. I'd be like making a mess for everybody. I have a good time as a billionaire. But that didn't happen for me, sadly. I would work for Airbnb. I like him a lot. I think what they're doing is really interesting. It's an interesting business. He's very innovative. He's a good guy. He's got ethics. They got some problems, but I like how he handles them. I work for Microsoft. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I think he's an astonishing CEO. I think he's innovative. He knows himself. He's an adult. I would work for Apple, I think, probably, because they're adult. I tend to go for the adult organizations, what I call them. And so I think what they're doing is, what they have to do going forward is really interesting as a company. They've got all kinds of things in front of them, even though they're one of the older companies. So those are Airbnb seems like a cool place to work. Or a small startup, one of the crypto startups, probably is where I get started. And then, what was your first question? I'm sorry.
What tech trend are you most optimistic
Oh, climate change tech. I spend a lot of time studying right now. And I don't know enough, so I don't write a lot about it, but I've written a little bit about it. So I think we're in an existential crisis right now. I think people don't realize all these phones are great until the world decides to fight back against it. So, and I'm pretty centrist on a lot of stuff, but it is very clear from any talk to any credible scientist what's going to happen and what's happening. It will happen to poor people first, and then it will happen. Then rich people will have to figure out. Rich people are always fine. They'll find something to float on or whatever. But I think it's really important. Climate change tech. I think that would be pretty cool. Thinking about there's dozens of different technologies, from carbon mitigation to space travel. I wouldn't go up in space, but I think it's important. That's one thing I admire Elon, not Jeff, but Elon's doing some really. He's just whatever. And one of my favorite moments recently, I interviewed Elon in September, I don't know why I did this, because I just really shouldn't, but I was like, Jeff's rocket, and he went off on a tangent about penis shape and stuff, but I think what they're doing around bringing down costs of space travel is really interesting, and the moon base, I think, is important because of the climate crisis. We have to be a multi-planetary species, we really do. Not me, but my children.
On Twitter a couple of weeks ago, there was a little hubbub between some of your Times colleagues about journalists and building their personal brand online.
Oh, yeah, with Taylor. I'm going to have Twitter Spaces with her tonight.
You've obviously been a master at sort of building a brand, and you and Scott obviously do a lot of work in that space. I'm just sort of curious what your thoughts are on journalists expressing themselves so publicly, what it means for tech journalism and media in general.
Here's the thing, I'm a professional Twitterer. I was one of the first people on Twitter, and a lot of these reporters are not professional Twitterers. And I'm not going to say who it is, but there's a couple people who I literally text, I'm like, get the fuck off Twitter right now. Like, take that down. There was one that was really bad that turned into a big hubbub, and right as this person posted, I'm going to take that down right now. It's going to be bad for you. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, take it down right now, please, please, for the love of God, take it down. And they didn't, and it was a huge thing. So I spend a lot of time, I'm very strategic in how I tweet. I do it emotionally, not very often. And so I'm very strategic in how I do it. And so I think probably reporters should dial back if they're news reporters. I'm an opinion reporter, so it doesn't matter as much. But some of them are really, should keep it to themselves, because it just, if they're, things have changed a lot in media, but I think it's really, really good to keep your mouth shut sometimes and just do your work and show your work that way. I think it's irresistible and they're addicted to it, so I'm not sure what to say about it, but a lot of people, I text so many people like, please stop, please don't do that, oh no. And they won't listen to me ever, and it ends up being a really bad thing. But that was Taylor. I think Taylor should have, I think she's made some mistakes, and I spend I talk to her a lot, and we've gone back and forth and some stuff, but I think she's right about internet culture. I think it's appropriate maybe for her. I didn't like her fighting with the VCs, because most of them misogynists, and they're like, why are you bringing yourself down to their horrible, nasty little level? And now they're all upset today because ivermectin apparently is not effective. But they knew, because they're doctors, these VCs and stuff. This study just came out. I don't even want to talk about it.
I want to end.
Okay, can I finish these last two? I'm sorry. Do you mind?
Oh, you want to take
Yeah,
it?
what
Okay.
the last ones?
So just one question regarding, technologies like the NSO, Pegasus and things like that. So that can be used or misused very easily by the regulators. So do you think going ahead we need to have regulators for the regulators? Or some, the judiciary steps in when things like these get misused? Because it's a big thing, right? It requires defense level clearance to actually purchase. Even I cannot go ahead and do that. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I did it very interesting with Edward Snowden a couple of years back, and I agree with you, it's really problematic. There were things in place, they just didn't follow the rules, they've since passed them. I think when you have any technology that allows you to spy, this is my feeling, the government's going to use it. They just are, no matter what government it is. It's too irresistible not to want to spy, not to want to know. And so when you have these tools, I'm much more worried about the Russians right now with the cyber attack. You should read Nicole Perlroth's book called This Is How the World Ends, Attacks on Our Grid. We have such a soft, as she puts it, a soft underbelly of attack. So I'm more worried about other governments at this point versus ours, which I think is doing a very good job fighting back. I did a good interview with Ann Newberger, who's our top cybersecurity person. I'm not quite as worried about the government as much as the exposure of consumers to these big tech companies that are unregulated. I think at some point the government does get found out when they do these things, and there are mechanisms, and they're elected. These are elected officials. As problematic as they may be, they're elected. And so I don't know if you can regulate or regulate. It seems, I'm hoping the system as it works with laws and judges and stuff will work. It has worked, but it's also been abused. You're going to see that. I'm more worried about these big tech companies with all this information, and then the Russians and other level players coming in and really doing real damage to our society. They haven't yet. Everyone thinks they're going to, and then they haven't, but doesn't mean they're not in there. I'm still worried about Russia cyber attack.
Thanks for being here and answering all our questions. Will try to be quick. So my question is about facial recognition. You kind of touched on it briefly, but since it's being so quickly integrated into our lives airport or
Yeah.
on phones. And the negative consequences are also pretty
Massive.
apparent in front of us for militaristic or police use. What are the levers that you think that we should be trying to kind of like tug on to make some sort of change to wrangle it as it gets rolled out?
There has to be regulation around this. Still hasn't been significant national and global. I've always thought there should be global cyber attack, just the way nuclear non-proliferation should be. There's never been a global discussion. The same thing with, you're not going to have a facial recognition because some countries love it. But I never accept that Britain has quite a lot of facial recognition issues. So I think there has to be national legislation around facial recognition. Even Andy Jassy, who's head of Amazon, is called for this. It is really, if that's one area you can go total dystopia, that is the area. And you allow yourself, putting all your pictures on Instagram and this and that, is really, you're just feeding into what could be a terrible thing. And I'll leave you with a story. Years ago, I had an argument with the founders, I don't remember which one, because they mentioned to each other at Google, and they were trying to take Yahoo's market share. They were going to take Yahoo for them because Yahoo was screwing up so much. It would have given them 90-something. They ended up getting there anyway, but they would have 94% of the market share in the United States on search. And I wrote a piece saying, we have to stop this. This is ridiculous. And one company cannot have control over all of our search because it's a database of human intentions. It's a database of everything people want. They know everything about you. You can't have one company have this. And so I wrote a story at the time. I think I said something like, this is thuggish, this is a problem, they should not have this. And I think I said at least when Microsoft was being challenged by the federal government, at least they knew they were thugs, what they were doing. They knew it was wrong, right? These people think they're doing this good, right? And I recalled when Larry Page once said to me, we were walking through Google and they were taping all of television. They had a room where they were taping all of television. And he was like, what's wrong with that? I'm like, you don't own the IP, you don't own this. He goes, well, we're helping people so they can find things. I'm like, but you don't own it. Did you ask them? Like, it was crazy. Like, it was this mentality. And so he called me and said, that's not fair. We're not thugs. I said, I'm a nice guy. That's what they always say. I'm a nice guy. And I was like, oh, sure, you're a nice guy. You're a strange guy, but you're a nice guy. What if the next person who runs Google isn't such a nice guy? What if we get a president that's willing to push boundaries in a way that we've never seen before? What if we get leaders that are willing to do that? And he's like, that's a negative view. And I'm like, again, you should read a history book because this is what happens. And so the one person being in charge of everything is really problematic. They're not thugs, they're not good guys. What would someone truly malevolent do if they get their hands on this much information? And that's my worry, and you can see it playing out in Russia right now. This is a nation that has been completely Fox News by Vladimir Putin. They believe, they see what they believe rather than believe what they see. And that is a really terrible thing, and it's been facilitated by, it's not just technology, it's not just the internet, it's cable news, it's television, but it's amplified and weaponized, and it drills right down into your brain and goes down to your lizard brain. And so that's why I'm really bad. And I don't mind being a Cassandra that way, because I think if you're not considering these things, the worst thing that could happen, you can't imagine the best things. And I believe that there's so many good things, again, Star Trek. So that's what I hope they'll do something about facial recognition, because it's really, but stop giving up so much of your information to these people.
Kara, I'm going to end with one positive line before we give you a round of applause.
Okay, I love my iPhone. I love technology. You can fly, really. I love it. I love it. The things it can do, what it's done. Technology is critically important to vaccine. These vaccines happening so fast. AI and all kinds of machine learning and everything else. It can it can lift up people. It can pull people out of poverty. It can educate people across the globe. It has so much potential. Stop playing to the worst qualities of it, or humans' worst qualities. I think that's what I would say. It has huge potential. So build companies that actually lift people up rather than suck the life out of them. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.